The morning of the hearing, I made my coffee the same way I always do. 2 sugars, a little too much creamer, left to cool on the counter while I got dressed. My sister called twice. I didn't answer either time. I'd been awake since 4. Not anxious, just quiet. There's a difference between those two things that I don't think most people understand until they've lived through something like this. My name is Renee, and what was about to happen in that courtroom had been 3 years in the making. I wore a gray blazer. Nothing special. I did my hair the way I always do for work, back, simple, clean. I didn't want to look like I was trying, because I wasn't trying to impress anyone in that room. I already knew how it was going to end. My parents were suing me. That's the part that still sounds strange when I say it out loud. My own parents. Over the house my grandmother left me. They said in the filing that I had manipulated an elderly woman, that I had taken advantage of her trust, that I was, and I'm quoting directly from the document here, a shame to this family. I read that line 3 times when their attorneys served me the papers. Then I folded them, set them on my kitchen table, and started making a list. My grandmother's name was Dorothy. Everyone called her T. She was the kind of woman who kept a notepad by the phone even after phones stopped needing notepads. She wrote things down because she said memory was unreliable and paper wasn't.
She was right about that.
That raised me for 4 years when I was between 7 and 11. My parents had what they always called a difficult period. I never got a clearer explanation than that. What I know is that I lived in Dot's house, slept in her guest room with the yellow curtains, and ate breakfast with her every single morning before school. My parents came back eventually. Stabilized, they said. We moved into a new apartment across town, and things went back to something that looked like normal from the outside. But I kept going to Dot's house on weekends. Every Saturday, almost without exception, for the next 20-something years. My parents didn't come with me. They said she was difficult. Too opinionated, too attached to the past. My mother stopped calling her entirely around 2015. My father followed a year later, the way he always followed my mother. Dot noticed. She never complained about it to me directly. But once, while we were sitting on her back porch, she said something I wrote down later that night. She said, "Some people show you exactly who they are when they think nothing is at stake." I didn't know then how useful that sentence was going to become. I was diagnosed in the spring of 2021. Early-stage dementia. Caught it relatively early, the doctor said, which meant she still had long stretches of complete clarity. She knew what was happening to her. She talked about it plainly, the way she talked about everything. She called me the day after her appointment, said she needed to get her affairs in order, and she wanted me there when she did it. I drove over that Saturday. We sat at her kitchen table with her attorney, a woman named Carol, who had used for 30 years, and we went through everything. The house, the savings account, a small piece of land in rural Virginia that I didn't even know existed. I didn't ask for any of it.
I want to be clear about that.
Made her decisions out loud, one by one, while Carol took notes.
She was sharp that day.
Precise. She knew exactly what she owned and exactly where she wanted it to go. My parents weren't there. They hadn't visited in over 2 years at that point. 3 weeks later, Dot called my mother.
I don't know exactly what was said.
What I know is that my mother called me that same evening, and her voice had a quality in it I recognized immediately. She was pleasant. Too pleasant. Asking how I was doing. Mentioning that maybe we should all get together soon. Suggesting that might need more family support.
I said that sounded nice.
And I started paying closer attention. My parents started visiting Dot in October of that year. Suddenly, consistently, twice a week. Bringing groceries. Sitting with her in the living room. My mother started calling her mom again, which she hadn't done in years. Dot told me about the visits calmly. She wasn't confused by them. She said, "Your mother brought tulips last Tuesday." I thanked her and put them in the garage. I almost laughed at that. But something was happening underneath the pleasantness. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Nothing you can point to exactly. Just something in the air that wasn't there before. In November, Carol called me. She said my parents had contacted her office requesting a copy of Dot's will. Carol told them she couldn't release that without Dot's authorization.
They pushed back.
Carol called me as a courtesy, she said. Just so I knew. I thanked her and sat without information for a few days. Then in December, had a bad week. Confused mornings. Some repetition. My parents were there for most of it. And somewhere inside that window, I found out later through Carol, they had brought their own attorney to the house.
Sign something.
When Carol found out, she called directly to ask about it. Didn't remember signing anything. That was the moment I stopped waiting to see what they were going to do. I already knew. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't tell a single person in my family what I knew. I called Carol first. Then I found my own attorney, a man named Gregory who specialized in elder law and estate litigation. I found him through a colleague at work who had been through something similar. That detail matters because Gregory was not the kind of lawyer you find through a general search. He was the kind you only hear about when someone who needed exactly this kind of help tells you quietly, "Call this man." I sat in his office on a Thursday afternoon in January and laid everything out. The original will, the timeline of my parents' sudden reappearance, Carol's account of the new attorney visiting the house, Dot's statement that she didn't remember signing anything. Gregory listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me 2 questions. How long had I known Dorothy? And did I have documentation of our relationship going back more than a few years? I told him I had photographs going back to 1994, emails, cards she had written me, a journal I had kept inconsistently but honestly since college, with entries mentioning our Saturday visits by date. I also told him where I worked. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you lead with that?" I told him I wanted him to take the case because it was the right case, not because of anything else. He nodded slowly and said, "We're going to be fine." That passed in March. Peacefully at home on a Sunday morning. I was there. My parents arrived about 40 minutes later. The drive to the house that day was the last time I cried about any of this. I gave myself that. The grief was real, and it was mine, and I didn't want it mixed up with everything else that was coming. By the time my parents walked through Dot's front door, I had already put it somewhere safe inside myself where they couldn't touch it. The legal process started almost immediately. My parents filed their claim in April. The document alleged that I had used deteriorating mental state to manipulate her estate planning, that the original will reflected confusion rather than intent, that the signature they had obtained during her difficult week in December was the more accurate expression of her wishes. I read the filing on my lunch break, finished my sandwich, went back to work. Gregory and I had spent those intervening weeks building a record that was, in his words, unusually thorough. Carol provided her full file going back to the original will drafting session. A neurologist who had assessed, in October, submitted documentation of her cognitive state at that time, fully competent, clearly communicative, legally sound. We had photographs, dated correspondence, witness statements from 2 of Dot's neighbors who had watched my parents not visit for years. And then there was the other thing. The thing Gregory had quietly confirmed 3 weeks before the court date. My parents' attorney didn't know what I did for a living. I'm a family court judge. Not in that jurisdiction. I was careful about that from the beginning. Gregory made sure we were in front of someone I had no professional connection to. Everything was clean. Everything was proper. I needed it to be. But the legal community is not large. And the judge assigned to our case had sat on a panel with me twice in the last 4 years. I didn't tell Gregory to use that. I told him specifically not to. What I wanted was to win on the record we had built. The photographs, Carol's testimony, the neurologist's report, the neighbor statements, the timeline that showed my parents hadn't set foot in Dot's house for over 2 years until the month after she updated her will. That record was enough. I knew it was enough. The courtroom was small. My parents sat across from me with their attorney, a younger man I didn't recognize, and my mother kept her eyes forward the whole time. My father looked at me once when they walked in. I looked back at him calmly, and then looked away. Their attorney stood and began presenting their characterization of me. The manipulation, the isolation, the shame to this family line that my mother had apparently repeated to him word for word because he used it almost exactly. I sat still, hands folded, breathing normally. And then the judge looked at their attorney and asked, in a tone that was professionally neutral but not warm, "Do you really not know who she is?" The attorney stopped mid-sentence. "Some people spend years building a version of you designed to make you small. They never consider that you kept building too." The attorney looked at his notes, then at me, then back at the judge. He didn't answer. He didn't have one. The judge moved forward without waiting. And something in the room changed, not loudly, not dramatically. More like a door closing, the kind you feel more than hear. Their attorney stopped saying manipulation, stopped saying undue influence. His sentences got shorter, more careful. He was no longer trying to win. He was trying not to lose badly. Everyone in that room could feel the difference. My mother's posture changed somewhere in the middle of Gregory's presentation. That particular certainty she always carried, the kind she wore like something permanent, softened. Not visibly to a stranger. But I have known her my entire life. My father never looked at me again. Not once. He stared at the table, and I understood he already knew how it ended. The judge ruled that afternoon. Original will valid. December document dismissed. Claim denied in full. Their attorney said something brief to my father. My father nodded, without expression. My mother smoothed her jacket the way she does when she doesn't know what else to do with her hands.
They walked out ahead of me.
I let them. I stayed in my seat a moment longer, not to savor anything, just to sit quietly with what I had known all along, that the people who show up when there is nothing to gain are the ones worth trusting with everything. She built her life around that belief, and she made sure I could protect it.